I'm Sarah Russell.
I'm JQ Walker.
I'm Hind, and we are
The Neurodivergent Report, a research-based podcast by and for neurodivergent brains.
In each episode, we'll explore topics relating to neurodiversity and coping strategies by reviewing the literature and discussing current topics.
We will also have interview episodes where we sit down with experts in the field and listeners like you, with the hope that together we can all learn to heal in community.
However you are able to engage, thank you for being here.
I'm being blinded over here because it snowed 3 inches yesterday in Canada. I love snow. I grew up in California, and you would build beach castles and sand castles, and they were cool for the day, but then the tide would come in and knock it all down. Long story short, but snow in Canada, it just stays all winter long. Today was like a nice late season snow, so everything's just like bright white. But the birds are here, and the trees are starting to bud.
I love that. I'm Sarah Russell, the host of the Neurodivergent Report, and today I am super duper excited to be sitting with Shaun Arora. Shaun is currently going between New York and Canada. He's living with a very neurodivergent family. Got some autism, got some ADHD, some learning disability stuff going on in there. So lots of strategies at work. Shaun has worked as a coach, advisor, a COO. He's currently on a mission to communicate about neurodiversity. Shared values. Shaun, it's really great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's wonderful to be here.
So I usually like to get started with just a little sort of getting to know you. Obviously, you and I have taken the time to get to know each other quite a bit, but my least favorite question ever, who are you?
I also don't like this question. And you mentioned the word adaptable before, and oftentimes I am a chameleon. I am jumping around because I need to put on a certain mask. So sometimes I'll put on a mask of being a Californian. That's my strongest identity. So when people say, where are you from? I'll say California. Maybe they were trying to figure out where my parents came from or where I was just at, maybe which direction I'm heading.
A little racial microaggression there sometimes, but okay. Yeah.
Well, but even like the simple question of where are you calling in from? Like people assume that where you're calling in from is where you live. And for me, I live in multiple places. And so it's never an easy question, but I do feel grounded in being a Californian. Sometimes in the neurodiversity world, I would label myself as a person with a lot of autistic traits and a smattering of ADHD traits and some other stuff. So it really depends on the audience. Sometimes I would talk about my professional background or my background as a father. I have at least 2 neurodivergent children. And so it's been fun to navigate my own neurodivergence, my partners, and theirs.
Sometimes very competing needs, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I love the depth of which you answered that question because, that's exactly why I hate it. It's very vague. I had sort of a follow-up, like, how did we connect just in case it all went wrong? But you killed it. That's awesome. Identity is so complex. I like to be correct about what I'm saying. I think that's a neurodivergent trait of mine. Very interesting. But I love that. When we first met, the first meeting, I asked you a very similar question, sort of like, where were you from kind of thing. And I wasn't exactly sure what I was asking either. I think sometimes it can be a little awkward, but just in good faith, being curious is sort of the method that I go with.
Yeah.
And it usually works out okay.
I was just going to say, on the receiving side, when you asked that question, I just noticed there's like several things happening on my side, which is I'm trying to interpret the question and also trying to interpret the answer. So interpret the question of where you're from. I have multiple different answers. Now, I also have to interpret the audience, like who is asking, why are they hoping to accomplish, and then zooming out. So I have the me, I have the we, and then I have like the broader spectrum of where are we going with this? What's the objective of the answer to the question? And if it's just a simple, hey, where are you from? Mic check, how's the weather? Then that's one thing. And so simple questions.
So it doesn't need all that thinking. Yeah, it can be a lie. Ooh, but I hate that.
But even simple question or lie, like I have to overanalyze everything. Like for some reason, none of this stuff comes intuitively. Like I have to reverse engineer. Okay, what are these different stakeholders? What are they asking for? And how do I manage that question? So I know it's a
Mhm.
little bit of a tangent, but it was just something
I
that like,
love I love the way that you sort of map out, like, why are you even asking me this question? How can I answer what you're really asking and cut through? Because so often there could be a mismatch in communication styles, and people often forget that the end goal is, like, continuing the conversation, like, understanding each other, that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, you grew up in California. Can you tell me a little bit about your family of origin?
yeah, sure. So my parents were both raised in India. My dad was a refugee. He grew up in refugee camps.
Are
And
they still with us?
uh, yes, so both my parents are
Okay.
still alive. But I don't really talk to them. That's a whole other story, another podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but he ended up meeting someone who said, "Hey, you should probably go back to school." He was just one of those like street kids running around, having fun, playing games. And someone said, "Hey, go back to school. You're smart. You should do something with your life." And so he ended up going back to school. The school realized he was smart. He did something with his life, and part of that involved coming to the States. He jumped around a little bit before settling down in California, and I still have an older sister. She was raised how they thought that a kid should be raised, and then through that process, they realized that there was so much discrimination, racism. This was 70s, 80s, um,
Mm.
Los Angeles, and they shifted gears and said, "Okay, you know what? Let's raise this kid to be as California as possible." So
Mhm.
I grew up with as much
The
Californian
specific
culture.
the specific phrase you used before was waspy, and so I've
Yes.
been using that a lot lately. I've met with, I think, like 5 different other people with the same accent from all over the country, and I'm like, "How did we learn this?" The Disney
Yes.
Channel?
Yeah, and a lot of my modeling was basically I just went to schools with very few people that looked like me.
Yeah. Right, and so you were getting the reinforcement to act.
Yeah, and actually, it's so bizarre identity because a lot of times someone would say, like, notice, "Hey, you're not waspy," and I'm like, "Oh, that's right, I'm not." Like, I don't even think about it.
Like how you look?
They would say, "Oh, but you're Indian," or you know this about India," or "You know this
Mhm.
about," like, I used to live in China, "You know this about China," like, you're not that person that you look like, and not the person that I feel inside.
That's
And
so
yeah,
interesting. I feel like that I feel like that when people tell me that I'm not disabled because I look strong without knowing that I'm only strong because otherwise I will be severely disabled if I let go of my wellness practices. And that feels similar, obviously very different consequences in society, but I just wanted to draw the comparison.
can we double click on that? Because I've met a woman, not last weekend, the weekend before, who was an incredibly successful exec at one of the big tech companies. And she just recently, after retiring, she realized that she had an ADHD diagnosis. She started crying. She's like, "I had to work so hard, and all this stuff makes sense. And if only I knew earlier, I could have done things differently. If only I had the right supports, I wouldn't have
Yeah.
had to work as hard as I did."
Yeah.
And we kind of talked through this. And part of the reason why she was successful was because she had to work so hard. It's a tax. What 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 would her life have been if she was in a more accommodating environment? Would she have developed that muscle of working hard and have
Mhm.
been successful? Would she have been able to accomplish so much more because there was less friction? Like we
Mhm.
don't really know.
No, but it is a very natural question to ask during the grieving process. And we don't always even think of getting diagnosed as a grieving process because, like, we don't really lose anything tangible, but it's a very ambiguous loss because we lose our identity. We lose that whole grasp on who we were and how our lives worked. And as we start to unpack our own neurodivergence, we like lose the scaffolding of what we thought we knew. And it's tragic.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, so let's talk about your own diagnosis. I don't know
Okay.
how you want to start that conversation.
Yeah, I don't think I would say with my parents, I think standing out, being different was a challenge because of that experience I mentioned with my sister,
Mhm.
learning that being different was not acceptable. How do you
Not
conform as
safe.
much as possible? And not safe. You're right. It wasn't. And so they tried to raise me as similar as all the other kids. And I did have some mental health challenges as a kid. It was a struggle. I received my autism diagnosis in my 40s, but like the prior 4 decades were filled with ups and downs. For example, I was nonverbal until the age of 5. And I hear this from a lot of people. My brain was busy. I was capturing the world, but I just wasn't able to use words. And that was reinforced by having a sister that took on a very motherly role with me, and she would become my translator. So anytime someone asked me about my needs, my sister would basically say, he needs this, he needs that. And I've had to learn how to, over time, how to advocate for myself, how to express my needs. I was just so accustomed to my sister saying, "Oh, I'll translate for you," that I just didn't even bother to speak. So maybe I would have been verbal at 4, but I had this wonderful person telling me everything and just guiding me through life. Um,
um,
so
did
yeah.
you communicate with her sort of non-verbally?
What I honestly think happened was she just assumed I wanted certain things, and I just believed her because she was the older sister. So I think
I
that's
love
basically what
that
happened. I don't think
dynamic.
there was really any communication, and I don't think she was right all the time. I was just like, "Okay,
That's
things are
okay.
happening. I'll just sit in the back seat and let life happen around me."
That's precious.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. I have a 2.5-year-old who sort of has some language skills, but it was really interesting to just watch that develop because like even when the specialists come, like he won't even use all of the skills that he has. And so they're like, "Well, how do you know that he understands?" And I'm like, "Because he does it." You know? So it's really interesting. There's all sorts of controversies around like quote unquote nonverbal autistics and their caregivers being able to like intuit their needs. And I personally, as someone who has a child that I quote unquote intuit their needs, like I don't hit every time. Sometimes he's like, no, that's not what I want and gets angry. So I just wanted to throw that in there, I think, because that topic can get a little woo woo. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And then do you want to talk about your experience through school? Because
Yeah.
as you said, you didn't have a diagnosis. By the time you reached school, you probably had acquired some language skills.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah.
I had to repeat kindergarten and 10th grade.
10th grade.
Yes. Yeah, so I got 2 extra years in there. A lot of people were trying to push me along, so I graduated at a reasonable age, but I went to the school where they said, "Do whatever you want, learn whatever you want." And so I loved math, and I ended up doing 7th grade math at a 6th, when I was in 5th, 6th grade.
That sounds
Um,
like a special school that they let you do that.
yes, but I'm not sure if it was for the best because my vocabulary was probably at a 1st grade level. My
Sure.
grammar didn't even develop, and so I really struggled when I transitioned to a bigger school at 7th grade where all of a sudden there's standardized tests, there's like expectation of language and grammar. And
Wow.
so starting really early in my middle school and high school, I had to figure out what the teachers were saying, and I was always behind. And I never really caught up. What I realized is it's kind of my learning style coming in conflict
Mhm.
with the neurotypical learning style, where a teacher would have an expectation of how to teach, and that would often not work for me. Maybe they would start with frameworks, and I would be like, okay, but let me just explore the edge cases here. And I would ask an edge case question, and they would say, that's completely irrelevant. I'm like, say more because I see it being relevant. And if it is what I'm seeing here, then that changes how I look at the whole thing. But if it isn't, I could discard that and focus on a much more narrow piece. So I start to like carve away at the edges to get to an understanding. By the time I get to the understanding, all of a sudden I'm zooming up. So like my first like 2, 3 months, I'll be failing like everything. And then all of a sudden I'll get straight A's and average out with a C at the end. And that was basically my learning style. Of course, as I got older, that
And the
learning curve would compress. So it would be like F's and D's for like maybe a week or two until I could really mask into what's a teacher learning style, what does a teacher expect as a response? And I'd start to like pretend to be the perfect student for that teacher. And then all of a sudden, once I pretended to be that perfect student, then I became that perfect student for the teacher.
That is so much extra work that you have to do just to do material that you already kind of can do.
Yeah. Although I don't know how other people do it. Like that's
I know.
just the way I learn.
I mean, that makes sense. You can't really, yeah, you can't really compare. But yeah, it just sounds so resource heavy to me, but it also sounds extremely effective.
Definitely. We
Um,
had
it
the practice SATs and we would just do that over and over again. So very quickly I realized how the College Board like designed a test, how they figure things out, how to do multiple choice, and then I started getting perfect scores
silly.
on those
That's
things.
silly. It's hard for me to believe that the school didn't notice there was a pattern and say something.
Yeah, they didn't. This was this was like late 80s, mid 90s. Yeah, yeah, they just did not have a clue.
I think you're just like 5 years too early then. Interesting. Or maybe just weren't living in the right region. You know, maybe you weren't close enough to a university, medical school. I don't know. That's so interesting to think about how significantly that process has changed, because at least where I am in Connecticut in the United States, if we start to notice like a developmental thing, we can sort of just call and be like, hey, I'm going to get this like service and we're going to see what's going on.
Yeah, it's like Autism Awareness Week or day or month right now. It's hard for me to keep
Yes.
track of it. But I've heard a lot of people arguing about the case for awareness and how just increasing awareness has increased the diagnosis rates. For
Mhm.
me, if people had more awareness, they would have said, "Oh,
Yeah.
that kid, we know what's up with that kid." There just wasn't the awareness like there is today.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the question that I'm sort of dancing around right now is, do you wish you were diagnosed earlier? Because, yeah, again, that grieving process, like sometimes we do.
Yeah, and it's like that woman that
Yeah.
I from Microsoft. I don't know. Right now, I just know that I enjoy my life. I love who I am,
Hmm.
and I think that's important. I think that there would have been many moments where it would have been helpful. So, for example, when I think about how I parent and my children's experience and my experience, I think that if my parents had a sense of my diagnosis, they probably would have been more relaxed about certain situations. They probably would have been more
Oh,
accommodating in certain environments, less frustrated. So I think that there's benefits to that. Um, for example, when I received my diagnosis, I talked to several people, and a lot of people would say, yeah, of course you have autism. Like that makes sense. It was really affirming just to hear people say, duh, obviously. And
yeah.
I I
That's called
felt
a
supported.
peer-reviewed diagnosis.
Yes. Yes. When I told my dad, it was kind of funny. He was like, "Oh, so that's why you don't have any friends." I'm like, first off,
Oh,
I have great friends, and second, I think there's a hereditary aspect to this.
yeah, significantly so, like 50 to 75% depending on the study.
Yeah.
So, and that's for
Mhm.
ADHD and ASD, folks. So,
Yes.
it's just really hard to look at yourself, especially when you've had that identity for so long and be like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna keep this one up.
Yeah.
I loved being a chameleon though. I used to dye my hair a lot before it started like turning gray and thinning. Anyway, and so I used to love changing the color. Now I guess my chameleon is just in my social skills.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was also late sort of diagnosed. We always knew I had like anxiety. Like they always said like, "Oh, Sarah has like problems," but they never really settled on anything more than anxiety until I was like 30, and I sort of begged my therapist to give me the screener questionnaire, and he had a PhD. His dissertation was in like autism and stuff like that. So he was and he had, did I say he had ADHD? himself. He was like, "You definitely don't have it." But then when we went through the questionnaire, it was extremely high. And he was like, "Huh, that's strange. You're like really easy to talk to." And I'm like, "I think that you're having like a bias problem, friend."
Yes.
Um
Mhm.
Anyway, I can't wait for the day when there's very objective diagnostics.
Yes. Yeah. And
Is that
especially
on the horizon?
it is. Yeah. So there's been
Let's
a
jump
number
to
of
that.
researchers who have developed biomarkers for ADHD. Now, caveat this,
Say
which
more.
is,
So a biomarker is something
yeah,
like a blood marker or like a breathalyzer test even?
yeah, basically. So
Awesome.
first off, ADHD is a collection of traits. So it's hard to even say what ADHD is,
Mhm.
but what they're finding is if they put a number of sensors on your body, and one of the biggest ones is a galvanic skin response sensor. You measure your heart, your blood pressure, you can measure all these different things, and through a
Yeah.
combination of how your body's reacting in certain situations, you can start to develop a biomarker. So you use all these signals, you figure out, okay, here's the marker that this person has, and they're drawing a high correlation between the data and the incidence data and ADHD. So pretty soon they're going to be able to have these various tests for diagnosing ADHD that are more quantitative that could help get around all the gender bias, the bias against people of color.
That is another huge research topic that I was never allowed to go into on my other podcast. But I have papers saved on how, people of color are more likely to get a mood disorder or a conduct disorder diagnosis compared to their white contemporaries. Wild that we're stigmatizing children.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm a mom. I think I'm a good mom because I care about all of the children, not just mine.
Oh, sorry. That was one of those times when I was just like stone cold, and you probably were looking for some sort of emotional response from me.
No, I wasn't. I was realizing that I would need to figure out where to go from here.
Oh,
I can just sort of spiral in my own little thing, but obviously
well,
we're live on, well, not live, we're not like
yeah.
streaming. Gosh, that'd be terrifying. I'm not ready.
But,
Um,
but that was one of those times where it's like, hey, there's several points in this conversation. Let me try to read what I should be saying. Let me try to read what she's saying. Let me try to figure out the situation. Let me try to entertain the audience.
we're
Like, it's
both
just,
just like neurodivergent. This is perfect.
it
Um,
is. Yes.
this Yeah, I think that was a really good modeling. And I was sort of just like looking down to I try not to demand eye contact.
Hmm.
It's there's
Yeah.
so many layers.
And
And
I've been
that's why
debating. Oh, go ahead.
it's easier sometimes to just go nonverbal, just to be non-talking.
Yeah. And I was going to add to that, like, not just looking down, but even off camera. I would have meetings where everyone's expected to be on camera. I'm like, hey, you know what? If you don't want to be on camera, that's totally cool. If you don't want to see, you could eat, you could fidget, you could do whatever without any judgment, without any observation. You don't have to focus on looking at the camera, which is way up there instead of looking at the screen. Like all that stuff is just
Is
very,
that
very frustrating.
what your neuroinclusion is all about?
It is. That's part of it
Yes.
for sure.
Okay, well
Um,
tell me about the rest of it. Tell me more.
so, um, yeah,
Feels like
maybe
a
I
good
should.
segue.
It does. And also we were just talking about children. So
Yeah.
I have three children. Two of them have official diagnoses for neurodivergence. And
Mhm.
um, when I disclosed to my team, to my friends, I got the obviously, when my kids are going to disclose, they aren't in a safe environment. And I was talking to my kids' school and said, hey, what are your thoughts around kids with autism? And they said, oh, it doesn't matter how smart you are. I'm like, wait, autism, intelligence, what's the link you're
What?
drawing here? I know
Yeah. What are
exactly.
you even
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, this is an interesting data point. Let me ask about ADHD. Like, what are your thoughts around kids with ADHD? It's like, well, we've had some instances with like kids acting up in class, and we just ask that they take the medicine at home. We can't administer medicine at school. Not every ADHD kid is hyperactive. Um, and yeah, 40% of them are not, as far as if I can remember the data correctly. Actually, isn't it more than 40%? Maybe I'm misquoting that.
I have no idea, and I don't even know if we would use the combo type. I don't look at subtype
Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you aren't looking at the subtype research because it's all nonsense.
What's
Like,
the
how many
point?
subtypes are there? Right now, there are officially 3, but you talk to lots of people, and there's just so many multitudes. You meet one person with ADHD, you met one person with ADHD.
Well, right, and then the
So,
next
yeah,
time we come out with the DSM, guarantee they're gonna change those categories anyway, so what
yeah.
I wanna save my brain for other stuff. Here's
So you were asking about um, neuroinclusion, and so my kids in their school environment, it was unsafe for them to disclose. Like I talked to the principal, we left the gym. I knew like, hey, this is an environment where you might have to mask, or you're going to have to advocate for yourself. Um,
I see.
my kids said, "Well, can you just tell me what the label is?" I'm like, "I probably can, but you're also very young, and I don't want you to use this as a crutch." And it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So even if you tell it to other people, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
These labels just don't work for whatever it is that we're going through in life. And it's like, well, can you create new labels? And so then I'm like, I don't know, can I? And so I started doing some research, and he's been helping me along, and like he constantly checks in. He's my accountability buddy. Every night he's like, Papa, what percentage are you in your brain stuff? And so I've been talking to researchers and talking to different people. I've been talking to educators, and this started about 3 years ago. And I started talking to my friend who is a CHRO of a fairly big company, and I was asking her about what she's doing around neuroinclusion and how does she support her neuroinclusive, her neurodiverse workforce. And she was tossing out a few things. Oh, we have an ERG. We've been doing some talks. And I was like, well, what about accommodations? And she's like, well, we don't really know how to handle it. It's like, well, I was just talking to this person a few minutes ago who said that they basically took the top 10 accommodations at their company and gave it to all employees as part of workplace experience. And then like a light bulb just went off and she's like, holy crap, that's genius. We should do it here. I'm like, wait, why don't you know this idea that this other person knows? Like, how do I get these ideas going? And so then I started calling like every single person I knew and said, hey, bring your CHRO into this room. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to exchange ideas because it's not happening right
Oh.
now. And that,
Oh, wait, okay, sorry, I'm slow. HRO is Chief HR Officer.
yes, exactly. Human resource
Human
is
resources,
HR.
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
and
No,
call
it's
me out
okay.
on any acronyms I use. I don't want to be
I
that person.
So it doesn't always matter, but this time it did. Context clues and all that. I love learning on air.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So
anyway, yeah,
the
so that's a
chief
great
human resource officer. Yeah.
question. I'm just kidding, I'll call
Yeah.
her this man.
So yeah, this woman leading a 10,000 person workforce, and she's bringing this idea in. And there's so many people I've been talking to, large companies, small companies. Every time I talk to someone, I learn something new, and they learn something new. So I just started doing more and more of these roundtables. These roundtables, I captured little learnings, and people who weren't able to be there said, "Hey, can you share the learnings?" So I started posting online, and
Mhm.
then the post became bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden it became a blog. So I blog under a Substack called Brain Types. And then that's becoming a book where overall my vision is that in, let's say 40 years, we're not using terms like autism and ADHD because those terms are flawed.
Yeah.
Obviously, the DSM is going to come up in the future. And I know that when they're planning the DSM, they want to try to make sure that whatever changes they make aren't going to be too disruptive to people who have prior diagnoses. So it's going to take decades before we could actually shift the
Yeah,
conversation to something different. That
sure.
said, there's so many people out there working with what what's known as transdiagnostic assessments, where you assess people based off of traits. You go back to 2013, and you could
Mhm.
either have only autism or ADHD.
That blew my
2014,
mind when I learned
yes,
that.
exactly. You could have both, and it's kind of a magical thing. There's so much overlap between the two. But then if you start looking at the individual traits, I have an autism diagnosis. I don't have an ADHD diagnosis. But my partner's like, you have more ADHD than I do. It's kind of
Mm,
funny. She has the diagnosis, but the way that my traits represent, there's certain things where I fit more the stereotype of person doing too many different things and a little bit hyperactive, like mentally,
mhm,
um,
uh-huh.
talking about this thing, then jumping to that topic.
You feel
So
like a
yeah.
genius type to me, like that stereotype to me. not to like
Yeah,
be all
yeah.
ego-y. I actually haven't heard much about transdiagnostics. There's so much I could say here because I have an ADHD diagnosis, combined type, which is flaring ADHD. That means you've got high scores for both types, so that's cool. But then when I've taken the RADS self-assessment, which is sort of the autistic adult self-assessment, and I've scored over a threshold. Now that's interesting to me, because I never really considered that for myself. However, it made me wonder about the self-assessments. So these things are really good at predicting, are you a neurodivergent or are you a neurotypical? But how good are they at telling between the different types of neurodivergence? And then, I mean, they only can develop tools that are as good as the information that we have. And they haven't even they haven't done very many studies on ADHD and sensory issues. So how do we know if somebody who has sensory issues is an ADHD person or an autistic person? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? It's
I know exactly what you
so
mean.
convoluted.
Mhm. Yeah. And just because you don't meet the threshold doesn't mean that you don't have traits. And that's one of the frustrating things about many of the current diagnostics. And even a
Mhm.
lot of the trans diagnostics, where a trans diagnostic is basically saying, hey, let's look at the entire mental health or the cognitive development or learning development landscape.
Would that be a neuropsych evaluation?
It would probably fit in under there. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And you would just do one evaluation. From that evaluation, it would say, oh, this is your diagnosis or that's your diagnosis. And you mentioned high top, where a high top is basically a new way to try to dissect things, but it doesn't even mention
Yeah.
autism in there. It does mention ADHD. And so
Uh-huh.
what I've been trying to work towards is one where we just get rid of all the labels. You go to work and you say, hey, I have an ADHD diagnosis. If you have a great supervisor, they're going to ask you the follow-up question is like, oh, how's that play out in work? What has been supportive in the past? If you have a horrible supervisor, they'll make a guess, and that guess is more likely to be wrong than it is to be right because
Mhm.
there's more than three types of ADHD. So, well, where I'm trying to look at this is, okay, how do we get rid of all these? But also, how do we get rid of neurotypical? What if we just say that you're on a spectrum of different levels of focus, for example? Some people could focus really intensely. Some people have a hard time focusing. Some people would be more inattentive. But
Yes.
that applies to not just the 2 to 4 billion people who are neurodivergent, but the 8 billion people on this planet. So can we make a transdiagnostic for the 8 billion where it's no longer about trying to figure out what other are you, but just trying to figure out how to better understand your brain. I've designed this sensory fingerprint that I use with my kids where we just plop eight senses around and just everyone says, okay, which one am I highly sensitive to? Which one am I not as highly sensitive to? And then that starts a conversation. So everyone sees we each have our own unique sensory fingerprint. And for me, for example, I'm not sensitive to sound, and my daughter is extremely sensitive to sound. So I might be making a lot of noise and not realizing that it's stressing her system. I could work in a cafe, and if she works in a cafe or is doing homework or something like that, she will probably do a good job for the first hour, but she'll start to burn out because she's working so much harder to be focused.
To block
And
out that additional stimuli that's distressing. What about
yeah,
smells? Do you like smells?
it's fine. Like I could be
I
around like
asked you
a
about candles before,
yeah.
and you were like, "Ooh, no."
Yeah. But like I have no problem cleaning up vomit when the kids throw up. Like I know a lot of people
Ah,
have a hard time with that. No, I'm pretty good
uh-huh.
with smells.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's related to your just general low registration of sensory input,
Hmm.
to use, like, highly clinical terms.
Yeah, and I think you could say high or low, but what I like about a sensory fingerprint is it's not as simple. Let's take eight senses. I could be highly sensitive in one and low sensitive in another. And my daughter is high sensitive in sound, and she's also high sensitive in taste, but she's low sensitive in visual. Like she has
I
no
would
problem with
love
flickering
to see
lights.
this.
Yeah, yeah, I'll share it.
Awesome. Could I post it to the show notes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's
So
incredible because we have very different needs in my household too.
yeah.
And my
So
needs have changed over time as well. I have sort of a 2.5-year-old. I keep saying, gosh, for the last 2 years, I've been not wanting as much physical touch. And, just really my needs have changed because I've been taking on caring for for another. I've been doing so much of that co-regulation at the cost of my own dang self. But that's okay. It's temporary.
Yeah, I find that being the primary caregiver of a young child at that age, you just get so overloaded with touch. There's so much touch. There's so many needs that they're looking for, and they're looking for you for
Hmm.
that. Um,
Yeah. Ooh,
you mentioned the
grounding.
sensory, and sensory is one component of a transdiagnostic. Another component is cognitive, and a lot of the assessments, specifically with autism, focus around cognitive abilities, but we also
Yeah.
hear about executive functioning. And
Yeah.
much of executive functioning is cognitive skills.
Yeah.
Um, and then organization planning. And then there's a third bucket of skills, which is social emotional.
Yep.
And I think that some people are really good at understanding themselves, but not as good as understanding the world. Some people are really good at understanding the world and people around them and not as good as understanding themselves. And some people have a different mix of those two. And so, once again, trying to
Yeah.
create a diagnostic that applies to all 8 billion. For example, for me, I have alexithymia. And so I
Hmm.
really have a hard time understanding other people. Some people call it a blindness to emotions. I just feel like I have to work so much harder to really understand. And I've learned how to do it, which is maybe asking questions, maybe switching from trying to read the nonverbal, trying to read all those aspects to just gain a translation. Hey, how are you feeling in this moment? Or I suspect you're feeling this. Am I accurate on that? And just building up that skill, that tool
Hmm.
set. So how does this play out in work? You could do that at work as well, because you probably have people at work that have a range of abilities to recognize emotions. And if someone's coming in having a hard day and they're picking up on lots of emotions and they see you, they might you might be very muted and they might be going through something because of your reaction. And just putting people in the room and saying, hey, this is how I deal with emotions and how I read social situations tends to be very therapeutic for a team and creates a lot of empathy.
Hmm. Being able to have that language is so helpful. I feel like we only learn that when we get diagnosed, though. So that's where like the label comes back to sort of benefit us. But what you were saying about the neurotypes, including sort of everybody getting rid of neurotypical, I was just reading a paper this week about that. I should send you. I realized that I wanted to record some research episodes about like what is neurodiversity or what is neurodivergence, and I found this research paper saying that neurodiversity really is like everyone, including the neurotypicals. And so yeah, and I don't even know if neurotypical is a real thing. It's just a bit. So I'm a sociology person, and there's this very old essay called Social Objectivity and the Myth of Normal, the normal type, basically just arguing that the normal type doesn't exist in reality. It's sort of like a utopia, so to speak. So anyway, neurotypical is probably just that fake person that we're never gonna live up to, those fake expectations of ourselves. So we could let that one go.
Yeah, the way I look at it is there's no average person, because if you think about it, the average person has one testicle and one ovary. Um,
That is
and
a way of putting it.
Right. So that person doesn't exist. And so then you have to look at like modes, medians, if you like want to get into statistics. But if you look at the standard deviation, how far outside of the standard deviation of certain learning patterns are you to where you start to say, okay, this is typical, this is not typical? If you go back, I love looking at it as television, for example. When you think about television back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were very few channels. And everyone got the news from the Tom Brokaws, the Peter Jennings of the world back in my era. Since we've gone through the cable revolution, instead of everyone getting their information from here and there's been a few things on the fringe, it's kind of leveled that curve. And so there's no typical information. You have very right-leaning journalists, you have very left-leaning journalists, you have people fighting over Gulf of Mexico versus Gulf of the United States of America or whatever we're calling it these days. And you have these big
Huge
divides.
eye roll.
But you have these divides in the media
Yeah.
that are really being amplified. We don't have a single point. And I think
Yeah.
that I've seen this across many different environments where we used to have a standard of everyone's going to wear jelly shoes. And then all of a sudden, we've gone away from that typical in fashion, in news. Are we going to get away from that typical in understanding people's cognition?
Hmm.
Because right now, a lot of learning is designed for a single type of learning modality.
Hmm.
And so if we start to compress it and say, hey, there's maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 20, maybe 100 different types of learning modalities? Can we start to teach to those? Could we start to implement workplaces towards those? And it sounds taxing, it sounds complicated, but it's happened in many different industries. We don't have a single genre of music that everyone listens to, like the Dick Clark show. We have all these different genres, and they're very personalized. You listen to Spotify,
Yeah.
and they do a pretty good job. Not perfect, but their algorithm's not bad. And are we going to be able to have some sort of algorithmic way to allow people to thrive at work, as opposed to forcing everyone into the same process, the same workflows for meeting objectives, to project
Yeah.
management, to meeting conduct? Could we create better environments so that all meetings are transcribed or recorded, that there's many different ways that you can communicate, that deadlines aren't just arbitrary? Oh, we need to make this decision by the end of the meeting, but we're not going to actually act on it for another 3 months. Can we actually have a meeting and have clear decision timelines? So, hey, we're going to have this meeting. After the meeting, you might have some ideas that come up. Please share it in this
Yeah.
format, or these 3 formats are acceptable. We'll incorporate that. And then in another 3 months, we need to make a decision. So we'll have that conversation in 3 months. Um,
Yeah. Giving the support structure to help keep people accountable and also help people know, what they need to do, I guess. Yeah, definitely. This sounds very much in line with the neurodiversity model, which is what those papers were about. Basically just working to make individuals you know, empowered to make their own changes, but also making changes to the environment that individuals have to live in would be great. Yeah, and
yeah.
totally sounds in line with that. Sort of, if there's anybody listening who has a really fancy job or maybe networks with people that could help you in some way, sort of how would they get in touch? Who might be a good fit?
Yeah. So really, anyone who is a decision maker within a company, who is making decisions on company culture, on company policy, would be a
Mm,
great fit. So typically, chief people officers, HROs, which is chief human resource officer, CEOs, COOs, the C-suite, the board of directors oftentimes will get involved if the situation gets to a certain point. But these are people who could influence how a company responds to this wave of people who are saying, I am neurodivergent. There's been some research that says that 53% of Gen Z identifies as being neurodivergent. So if your workplace was designed for a neurotypical mindset, and you all of a sudden you have a majority of people coming into your workplace saying, hey, I'm neurodivergent, how are you going to accommodate those people? How are you going to support them? Or are you going to make the environment hostile and they're going to churn out after a year or two? For many
mhm.
companies, they spend so much money trying to recruit people. It just seems silly to lose them just because you're being stubborn about certain expectations around meetings, or you have to be at work exactly at 9 a.m. You can't come in 5 minutes early or 5 minutes late. There's just a
Mhm.
lot of ridiculous things that happen. Um,
Not
yeah.
even to mention the harm that's being done to the individual workers. That's sort of a different issue.
Yeah. So you asked,
But
how can people
yeah.
reach out? So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's my name is spelled ShaunArora, not the typical Shaun, not the typical Aurora. But if you search that on the Googles of the world, you'll find me LinkedIn/in/Shaun Arora. Please follow me, because that definitely helps in getting the word out. It helps with publishers giving me more resources to really get this going. And
Mhm.
from there, you can sign up to my newsletter. The Substack is called Brain Types, and I try to post things weekly there. But LinkedIn, I'm posting stuff almost every day.
That's very exciting. I didn't know about your newsletter, so I'll go subscribe to that. That sounds cool. Yeah, I think that's it. I do have one final question, and it's
Yeah.
something that you couldn't possibly have prepared for.
All right.
I've got these cards. It sort of made them, but it's prompts from a company called We're Not Really Strangers. It's just a bunch of relationship building cards. I suck at coming up with examples on the spot, so it's really helpful to just have prompts. And it's super fun to pick novelty surprise. But if you don't like it, we can pick another question also. I've been giving everyone that option. Okay. Describe a situation where you said yes to something and you're really glad that you did.
Yes to this conversation.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah. I said yes to love when I wasn't quite ready. I met this woman who was incredible and she was my best friend. And she said, "Hey, I want to take this friendship to another level and be your partner." And I told her, "Hey, like I'm going to grow with you and I'm going to die with you and we're going to have this wonderful life. I just don't know if I'm ready for this right now." And she's like, "Well, make a decision." And I decided to say yes to her. And it's been a learning journey. It's been an opportunity for me to mature, but I haven't been happier. I found the perfect partner and we've been working through lots of fun challenges together. Like I'm glad that she's in my life and we're doing these things like raising these three beautiful humans and figuring out this multi-city life.
I can't wait for her to listen to this. Oh my gosh. I'm crying a little bit. That's just so kind. And I think that's a really good example, especially for this audience. Because, yeah, it can be really scary to take a risk with, especially with a social situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to say, being
But it's beautiful when it
neurodivergent,
works out. Yeah.
yeah, being neurodivergent, living by yourself is great because you have systems for everything. And bringing someone into that to mess up the systems and trying to combine systems and communicate and coordinate is just such a headache. And doing that
You
with
sound
her,
like
with
my
the three
husband.
kids, it's so complicated, but it's also so
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah. The chaos is a special, like, it's special.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, awesome. I'm so glad that we met and we had this conversation. We're definitely going to have some more in the future. We'll just have to figure that out off air. Amazing. Shaun, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. And yeah, I will drop all the links in the show notes to make sure that everybody can find you super good. Yeah, that's awesome. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Yeah. It's been really, really fun to have this conversation. I appreciate you putting this out into the world.
Thanks for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Substack, etc.
If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Please do that.
And hey, if you want to check out more about us, visit our website at ndreportpod.com. And you can also go there if you want to be a guest contributor on the show.
Until next time, be well, do good.